What up, what up, what up? Back again. Today's video is called Gnostic Theology and Parasitism and Simulation Theory. So I guess there's three topics. I like to do things in threes. So Gnosticism, what's that? Well, Gnosticism, some say, is the original Christianity, but actually there's this other sect called the Mandeans, right? So the Mandeans are really interesting to me because they have this like dual pedigree of being considered, Hellenic style Christians, but also they have this thread of lineage from the Indo-Iranian, like Zoroastrian type of theology, right? But, some say Gnostics were the original Christians, and there's a lot of data to support that. And really the only remnants we really have of information about the Gnostics virtually is their critics and the people that are claiming that they're evil heretics talking about what they believe. So those people basically murdered a lot of them and burned all their literature and stuff like that. So what did the Gnostics teach that was so dangerous to these Roman colonizers and their Neo-Babylonian, Neo-Canaanite, Neo-Phoenician slave cult of hierarchy dominance, right? So the Gnostics taught that there's this being that they refer to as various different names: Saklas, Yaldabaoth, the Demiurge, right? All these different names. This theory was that the universe and the world that we perceive was a deception, and that these celestial beings that from the so-called pleroma, or the fullness, also called the treasury of light, right? These higher beings from somewhere up there that are like pure energy beings beyond time, right? Somewhere up there. And they have the capacity to create worlds and universes just out of their imagination and stuff like that. So the story is that they originally exist in this thing called the syzygy, which is a union of two opposing principles, like male and female, right? So there was one instance of a split syzygy, these two twins that separated, right? And so the female twin was called Sophia, and she fell down to earth and created earth out of her grief, more or less. Right? So she went from a higher world into this lower world, right, of imprisonment and entrapment and limitation, right? And based on her grief and mental illness, right, like she creates the world that we call home. And her son, like her offspring. So imagine like there's certain organisms that produce asexually, right? It's almost like cloning. They clone themselves to a degree. And a lot of those kind of organisms, they create more or less an exact copy of themselves. So there's no real mutation or evolution in the same way that, sexual dimorphism produces, right? So this is a very interesting mythology. It's very symbolic, and it has a lot of relevance to us. And so in this story, right, the way they describe this reality is that being forced to reproduce through cloning or through this asexual methodology produced a great delusion of separateness and this lust and this unquenchable longing to be reunited. But there's also this form of insanity and delusion that goes along with that. So more or less the being Sophia, right, forgets her nature and her origins and gets lost in this like labyrinthine maze of her own dark imaginings and suffering and pain. So if anyone's ever seen that movie, What Dreams May Come, with Robin Williams, it's pretty much 100% Gnostic allegory. And the story of Orpheus is very similar to this same kind of methodology with the lost female that goes to the underworld, right? And she loses her youthful, abundant, natural fertility and goes into this dark underworld, right? So Sophia creates the Demiurge, right? So that's her son. And again, her son is partaking of the same type of mental illness and delusion, right? And so because he's the only divine being around, right, in his own eyes, right, he imagines himself as creator of all reality, right? Not acknowledging or not admitting that there's like a higher light. So this is often referred to in solar terminology, right? How the sun during the day, we can only see the sun, like we can't see any of the stars. And we can't see the galactic center, that some say gave birth to our whole galaxy, right? It's a black hole. It's invisible. It's eclipsed by the sun. So the sun often is a metaphor for this ego principle, right? that asserts itself as the center of all reality, even though it is the child and the offspring and the tiny fractalized piece of this much grander whole, right? So it tries to stand in and assume all the powers of this pleroma, the actual fullness of space, and it will crush any attempt to, like, you know, reveal the fact that it isn't really the top of the pyramid, right? And so it has these different archons, right? They describe these archons, and the archons are described as, like, there's 3 different forms that they take. I think one form is like an embryonic, almost like a tadpole, right? And then there's this other, like, sky dragon kind of form, right? But they have this image sometimes called Kenobus, sometimes called the demiurge. There are different names. Yaldabaoth, like I say, there's different names for it. Abraxas or Abrasax is another name, right? So again, Abrasax number is 365, just like the days of the sun. So that ties it back into this solar imagery. So this Kenobus, or this being, the demiurge, is often represented like a worm with a lion's head, almost like a flowery head out of this worm, parasite worm, right? So this all gets very interesting, and I could easily do like a 10-hour presentation on all this, but just suffices to say, the theory is that these Templars, right, these Crusaders and these Templars came in contact with these Gnostic teachings that were directly in contrast to the Vatican and the papacy, right? But also arguably can claim an older lineage, right? And so these Gnostics identify this parasite, right? And they identify this being, right? But so an interesting thing about the Templars is they often were found with these Gnostic amulets and stuff like that, representing this demiurge as the serpent or parasitic worm with a lion's head, right? And they say that this thing gave them power. Okay, so now here's where it gets kind of weird. What if that symbol is actually a symbol of a parasite, which is known, I think it's called Toxoplasmosis gondii or something like that. But this is the catworm, right? The catworm. That's why it has a lion's head with a worm, right? So these catworms infect the anus and the digestive tract of cats, and it kind of makes them crazy. It modifies their behavior and makes them sexually promiscuous and stuff like that. And cat owners who live in close proximity, this is a really fucked up story, but I can testify to the full facticity of this mental illness that comes out of that. Okay, so I knew this guy who lived in a storage unit for a long time with these cats and dogs, right? And eventually, and so, you know, he got infected with this toxoplasmosis, and it caused him all kinds of health problems, and he went mentally ill, right? And so when people get this, like the typical cat lady and hoarder syndrome is these cat ladies, like they learn to love, and the parasite hacks them so that they love the smell of cat piss and cat feces, because that's evidence of the parasite replicating and spreading. And so these cat ladies will hoard a bunch of cats and get all the cats and hoard them into this closed space so that they all get the parasite, right? And then the cats, their behavior is such, they get biohacked and they want to spread the parasite, and they adopt all these self-destructive behaviors that lead to them spreading the parasite around, right? So these Templars, right, who use this Gnostic symbol of the cat head with the worm tail, right? They had this ritual, so it is said, where they would kiss the anus of a cat. And this was part of their initiation into the Templars. Now, keep in mind, the Templars are widely reputed as a pedophile homosexual order, right? So joining them pretty much means that you're going to be sexually initiated into anal sex at a young age by these older males, right? So again, making you vulnerable to this parasite and making you adopt behaviors which contribute to the spread of this worm-like parasite, right? And so the Templars were known for black magic, pedophilia, human trafficking, drug trafficking, and so on. But they became the richest, you know, dynasty, more powerful than popes and kings, and they basically created what we call now modern international finance and international banking, and this debt-based currency system, which goes around parasiting other countries until they all have like Vatican Rothschild controlled central banks, you know, right? So out of this Templar order of these Gnostic worm worshippers, right, you get this infectious cult of international finance that spreads around the world, right? So let's look into this parasitism, right? And there's all kinds of parasites, right? There's thousands and thousands of parasites that eat people's hair follicles and like live on their pus and live in their skin. Everyone's got them. They're all over people's bodies, but some people that infection goes like really out of control, or people get tapeworms and all these different intestinal parasites. But the common theme is that these organisms, right, they hack the host, and they change the host's behavior and their psychology and how they think and they perceive. Just like the demiurge in this Gnostic theology creates a false universe of illusion and has these archons place layer after layer of illusions upon all the people, right, so that they cannot escape the false reality, and they live in subservience to these archontic rulers, these bankers and popes and fake pedo presidents and stuff like that. They live in submission to those powers and those authorities because they've been biohacked internally to live in a world of illusion and to believe in false fiat currency that has no inherent value. But they live and die and make all their decisions based on this illusion, right? And they're parasitized internally. They no longer have their own internal sovereignty over their own mind, right? Their mind has been parasitized, right? So let's continue this analogy. Just like these toxoplasmosis worms and parasites inhabit human and animal bodies and biohack them and alter their behavior to become mentally ill, sexually promiscuous, and often homosexually promiscuous, right, to create maximum spreading for this intestinal worm parasite, right, that lives in buttholes and poop, right? Because otherwise no humans would find the smell of feces and urine as to be sexy, right, and find sexual organs like tasty and desirable to put their mouth onto, right, so they can get like HPV virus like George Harrison and die from throat cancer because they were eating way too much pussy, right? They end up dying from that, right? And these are basic parasites, right? And so how could you not argue that our world right now and media has become the new vector of the parasite, right? They get the physical parasites from all their promiscuity and stuff like that, but they also get a psychological parasite that's constantly reinforced by the media, right? And I argue this is the main reason why ivermectin and all these different therapies were shut down in the media, because they're trying to give everyone parasites in the shots, okay? First of all. Second of all, what we call cancer and all these chronic maladies that the medical industry thrives on and lives on, in the pharmaceutical industry, would go bankrupt without them. They're all parasite based. And virus is one example of a parasite. It's like a subcellular parasite, right? A DNA parasite, actually. So it's actually more like a computer virus and a code virus, right? But the point is, there's natural, free, low-cost therapies that would eradicate all parasites, and ivermectin has certain properties of that. I'm not saying that's a perfectly great medicine. It has a lot of potential hazards and side effects, but you can get the same effect from a lot of natural substances as well. But the point is to say that's why these things all got shut down, is because it would get rid of people's parasites, and their psychology would be able to change, and they might get out of all these sexual perversions and lust addictions and complete consumerism and worshiping these fake authorities. Those are all psychological conditions that could be the result of parasites in the human body, okay? This is fact. And anyone who wants to go do research, there's a plethora. You could never exhaust all this information in your lifetime. There's so much information about what I'm saying. But what people haven't thought about or haven't started talking about is how so many physiological and psychological conditions people have now that permeate and are encouraged and basically promoted through the media, through pervasive centralized control of the media, through Hollywood and the defense industrial complex going back a century or more, right? And through controlling higher education. They're encouraging behaviors that will spread the parasite, okay? They're encouraging dietary measures that will spread the parasite. They're encouraging medical interventions that will spread the parasite, right? I don't like to be parasited. I do parasite cleanse, right? I cleanse my body with these different they ban a lot of these substances that will get rid of the parasites, right? So that tells you kind of who's in control of the system right now. They don't want you to have knowledge about how to do a parasite cleanse and get all these worms and viruses and all the shit out of your fucking skin, out of your intestines, out of your brain. They even go up and crawl up your spinal column and get into your brain. And that's why people think it's normal and sexy to look at porno and act like a hoe, a TikTok OnlyFans hoe, and have no intellect and have no artistic creativity and just replicate the virus. They think that's cool and attractive. It isn't attractive to me. I want to heal everyone from that.